Hello, and welcome to Blessed Sleep, where faith meets rest through the timeless wisdom of Scripture. Tonight, we will share the journey of Eliam, a broken builder in ancient Jerusalem, a narrative inspired by Psalm 147. This story explores the profound truth that God heals the brokenhearted and gathers the outcasts, and teaches us about divine restoration, the tender care of our Creator, and how He determines the number of the stars while binding up our deepest wounds. As you listen, allow these faith-filled words to envelop you, bringing tranquility to your mind and renewal to your spirit. Let the gentle guidance of biblical wisdom lead you to a place of complete peace, resting in the presence of God. If this video blesses you, I would be deeply grateful if you could take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support enables me to continue sharing God's wisdom through these stories, creating more content designed to bring peace and spiritual refreshment through Scripture-inspired narratives. Now, take a deep breath, settle into the presence of God, and let us begin tonight's journey through this blessed story. Chia, for the first light of morning had not yet touched the eastern hills when Eliam opened his eyes in the small room where he had lived alone for 3 years now. The limestone walls around him were cool to the touch, holding the night's chill even as the world outside prepared for another day. Through the narrow window, he could see the faint outline of Jerusalem's silhouette against the slowly brightening sky. The city where his ancestors had lived for generations. The city that had witnessed both his greatest joy and his most profound sorrow. Eliam was a builder, a mason, who had learned his trade from his father and his father before him. His hands, rough and scarred from years of working with stone, knew the weight of each rock, the angle of each chisel strike, the patience required to fit one stone perfectly against another. These same hands had built homes for families, repaired walls that protected the city, and shaped the very landscape of Jerusalem's growing quarters. But these hands had also failed to hold on to what mattered most, and that failure had left him more broken than any structure he had ever seen crumble. He rose slowly from his sleeping mat, his body stiff from yesterday's labor. The room was sparse, containing only what was necessary: a clay lamp that had burned out during the night, a water jug, a small wooden chest that held his few possessions, and the tools of his trade carefully arranged along one wall. There had been more once. There had been laughter echoing off these walls, the sound of small feet running across the floor, the warmth of another presence that made even the coldest winter night bearable. But that was before the fever had come, before he had watched helplessly as his young wife Miriam and their daughter Abigail had slipped away within days of each other, before the light had gone out of his world. That had been 3 years ago, and in those 3 years, Eliam had learned to exist in a sort of twilight, moving through his days with mechanical precision, working until his body demanded rest, sleeping until work called him again. He spoke little, smiled never, and kept himself apart from the community that had once embraced him. The other builders tried at first to draw him out, to remind him of the man he had been, but gradually they learned to leave him to his silence. He was reliable in his work, skilled beyond most, and if he chose to carry his grief like a stone around his neck, that was his burden to bear. As the morning call to prayer echoed across the city, Eliam performed his ablutions with the same careful attention he brought to his stonework. The water from the jug was cold, shocking his skin awake, and he remembered without wanting to how Miriam used to warm water for him on cold mornings, how she would tease him about being too delicate for a man who spent his days hauling limestone blocks. The memory came unbidden and unwelcome, and he pushed it away as he had learned to push away all memories that brought pain, which was to say, nearly all of them. He wrapped his worn prayer shawl around his shoulders and spoke the morning prayers, words that had been part of his life since childhood, words that now felt like empty sounds in his mouth. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe," he began, but his voice trailed off. What blessing was there in this life? What kingship did he see in a world that could take a gentle woman and an innocent child? He finished the prayers out of habit, out of respect for his father's memory, but his heart remained untouched by the words. The city was beginning to wake as Eliam made his way through the narrow streets toward the construction site where he had been working for the past month. Jerusalem was always building, always growing, always repairing what time and weather had worn away. The morning air carried the smell of fresh bread from the baker's ovens, and despite his determination to remain apart, his stomach reminded him that he had eaten little the day before. He purchased a small loaf with a few coins, noting how the baker's wife looked at him with a mixture of pity and concern, and moved on before she could speak the sympathetic words he could see forming on her lips. The construction site was in the upper city, where a wealthy merchant had commissioned a new home. The foundation had been laid weeks ago, and now the walls were rising, course by course, stone by stone. Eliam found a strange comfort in this work, in the way chaos slowly transformed into order, in the way scattered rocks became something solid and permanent. If only human lives could be built with such certainty, he often thought. If only grief could be mortared into place and covered over with new stones until it was buried so deep it could never surface again. His fellow workers were already there when he arrived, and they greeted him with nods and brief words. There was Joash, the foreman, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard who had known Eliam's father. There was young David, barely 16, learning the trade and full of questions that Eliam rarely answered. There was Benjamin, who had lost his own wife years ago, and sometimes looked at Eliam with an understanding that needed no words. They worked together in a rhythm established over weeks and months, each man knowing his role, the sound of chisel on stone creating a music of labor that filled the morning air. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the heat that would build throughout the day. Eliam worked steadily, his mind focused on the immediate task before him, selecting the right stone, trimming it to fit, testing its placement, adjusting until it sat perfectly flush with its neighbors. This stone would support the stones above it, and those would support others, until the entire structure stood firm. It was a lesson his father had taught him. Every stone matters, every placement counts, and a builder must care for each individual piece while keeping the whole structure in mind. "Eliam!" Joash called out near midday. "Come see this." The foreman was standing at the corner of the emerging structure, examining a section of wall with a critical eye. Eliam set down his tools and joined him, following his gaze. "What do you see?" Joash asked. Eliam studied the wall carefully. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but then he noticed it. A hairline crack running through one of the stones several courses down. It was subtle, barely visible, but his trained eye caught it immediately. "The stone is compromised," he said quietly. "It will fail eventually." "Yes," Joash nodded. "And when it fails, what happens?" "The stones above it will shift. The weight will redistribute. Eventually, the entire section could collapse. So what must we do? Remove it, replace it, rebuild what needs to be rebuilt." Joash placed a weathered hand on Eliam's shoulder. even if it means undoing work already done, even if it means going back to what seemed finished. Eliam looked at the older man, sensing something beneath the simple question, but he only nodded. Yes, better to repair it now than to build on a flawed foundation. Good, Joash said softly. Remember that, my friend. It applies to more than walls. Before Eliam could respond or retreat back into his protective silence, a commotion at the edge of the construction site drew their attention. A small crowd had gathered, and voices were raised in argument. Eliam recognized some of the local residents, people who lived in the modest homes surrounding the construction site. Among them was an old woman named Hannah, a widow who lived alone in a house that had seen better days, and a younger man, one of the merchant servants, who was gesturing impatiently toward her home. "The master has made his offer," the servant was saying, his voice carrying across the site. "It is more than fair for such a property." "Fair?" Hannah's voice was thin but fierce. "That house has been in my family for 3 generations. My husband built it with his own hands. My children were born there. You cannot measure such things in silver. The master needs the land. He is expanding his property. You cannot stand in the way of progress, old woman." Joash muttered something under his breath and started toward the argument, but Eliam found himself moving first, his feet carrying him forward before his mind could question why he cared. He had spent 3 years avoiding other people's troubles, 3 years wrapped in his own grief, and yet something about the old woman's defiance, the way she stood trembling but unbowed before the servant's contempt, stirred something in him. "What is happening here?" he asked, his voice quiet, but carrying an authority he had not used in years. The servant turned to him with irritation. "This is not your concern, builder. Return to your work." "I am working," Eliam said calmly. "This is the site I'm building. These are the neighbors who will live beside what we create. So I ask again, what is happening here?" Hannah looked at him with surprise, then gratitude. "They want to take my home," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "They say the master's new house needs the land, that my little plot stands in the way of his grand vision. They offer me money, but where would I go? How would I live? I am old, and that house is all I have left of my Samuel." The servant opened his mouth to argue, but Eliam held up his hand. "Wait," he said. He turned to Joash, who had joined them. "Is this true? Does the plan require her property?" Joash scratched his beard thoughtfully. "The original plans included it, yes, but plans can be modified. We could adjust the eastern wall, reduce the courtyard slightly. It would still be a fine home." "The master will not be pleased," the servant warned. "Then let the master come and speak to her himself," Eliam said, surprising himself with his boldness. "Let him look into her eyes and tell her that his courtyard matters more than her home. Let him be the one to scatter what should be gathered." The words hung in the air, and Eliam felt their weight even as he spoke them. Scatter what should be gathered. Where had that phrase come from? It felt important, like something he should remember, but the thought slipped away before he could grasp it. The servant glared at him but seemed unsure how to proceed. Finally, he turned and stalked away, muttering about reporting this insolence to his master. Hannah reached out and grasped Eliam's hand with both of hers, her skin papery and thin, her grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." "For seeing me." The words struck Eliam with unexpected force. When had anyone last truly seen him? When had he last truly seen anyone else? He had been so buried in his own pain, so determined to remain invisible, that he had forgotten what it meant to look at another human being and recognize their worth, their struggle, their right to exist in their small corner of the world. He nodded awkwardly and gently freed his hand, retreating back to his work. But something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the wall he had built around his heart, just as subtle as the crack in the stone, just as potentially dangerous to the structure he had so carefully maintained. The rest of the day passed in a blur of physical labor. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent toward the western hills. The heat was oppressive, and several times the workers had to pause to drink from the water jars kept in the shade. Eliam worked with his usual focused intensity, but his mind kept returning to the morning's encounter, to Hannah's trembling defiance, to his own unexpected involvement. Why had he stepped forward? Why had he cared? As the sun touched the horizon, painting the limestone walls of Jerusalem in shades of gold and amber, Joash called an end to the day's work. The workers cleaned their tools and prepared to disperse to their homes. Eliam gathered his belongings slowly, in no hurry to return to his empty room. David, the young apprentice, approached him hesitantly. "Master Eliam," the boy said, "may I ask you something?" Eliam looked at him, at his earnest young face, still unlined by grief or disappointment. "What is it? Why did you help that woman today? Everyone says you prefer to keep to yourself." "Everyone talks too much," Eliam replied, but without heat. He paused, considering the question seriously. "I helped her because she needed help. That should be reason enough." "My father says you lost your family," David continued, and Eliam stiffened. The boy pressed on courageously. "He says you used to be different, that you used to laugh and tell stories and teach the younger builders. He says grief changed you. Your father should teach you when to hold your tongue," Eliam said, but again there was no real anger in his voice. He sighed. "Yes, I lost them. Yes, I changed. What else would you expect?" "I don't know," David admitted. "I have never lost anyone I loved. But my father also says that the dead would not want us to stop living." Eliam felt a flash of irritation. What did this boy know about loss? What did anyone know about the gaping hole that had opened in his life, the way the world had lost all color and meaning? But he looked at David's open, honest face and realized the boy was not trying to hurt him. He was simply speaking truth as he understood it, truth that Eliam himself had once believed before the fever took everything that mattered. "Go home, David," he said quietly. "Go home to your family, and while you still have them, love them well." The boy nodded and hurried off, leaving Eliam alone in the gathering dusk. He stood for a long moment, looking up at the emerging stars that were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. His father had taught him the names of some of those stars, the ancient names passed down through generations. "God knows each one," his father had said. "He calls them all by name. If he cares so much for lights in the sky, how much more does he care for you, my son?" But if God cared so much, why had he allowed Miriam and Abigail to die? Why had he not heard Eliam's desperate prayers, offered up night after night as the fever consumed them? Why had he not healed them, gathered them back from the edge of death? The questions burned in Eliam's chest as they had burned for 3 years, unanswered and unanswerable. He turned away from the stars and began walking, not toward his home, but aimlessly through the darkening streets of Jerusalem. His feet carried him through the lower city, past the pool of Siloam, where people still gathered to draw water, past the shops closing for the night, past the synagogue where his father had taught him to read the sacred texts. He walked until he found himself at the city wall, at a section that had been damaged during a recent storm and was awaiting repair. The broken stones lay scattered, and in the moonlight they looked like bones, like the ruins of something that had once been whole. Eliam sat down on one of the fallen stones and let his head fall into his hands. The exhaustion was not just physical, it was a weariness of the soul, a deep tiredness that no amount of sleep could cure. He was so tired of carrying this weight, so tired of the anger and the questions and the emptiness, but he did not know how to put it down. He did not know how to be anything other than what he had become, a broken man building walls for others, while his own inner walls grew higher and thicker. "You look troubled, my friend." The voice startled him. Eliam looked up to see an old man standing nearby, leaning on a walking staff. He wore the simple robe of a scholar, and his beard was white as wool. His eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to hold a depth that spoke of wisdom earned through long years. "I am fine," Eliam said automatically, the response he gave to everyone who tried to penetrate his isolation. "Ah," the old man said, settling himself onto a nearby stone without waiting for an invitation. "You are fine, I see. And that is why you sit alone among broken stones in the darkness, looking as if you carry the weight of Jerusalem on your shoulders." Despite himself, Eliam felt a faint stirring of something that might have been humor. "You are very presumptuous, old man." "I am very old," the man agreed cheerfully. "Age grants certain liberties. Also, I am called Azariah, and I am a teacher of the law. And I have learned that sometimes the most broken places teach us the most profound lessons." "Then you should find much to learn here." Eliam gestured at the scattered stones. "This wall failed. The storm was too strong, and it collapsed." "Did it fail?" Azariah asked thoughtfully. "Or did it simply reveal what was already weak?" "A storm does not break what is truly strong. It merely exposes what was already compromised." Eliam thought of the cracked stone in the wall they had been building, of Joash's questions that had seemed to probe deeper than mere masonry. "Perhaps," he admitted. "You are a builder," Azariah observed. "I can tell by your hands, by the way you look at these stones. Tell me, when you find a wall that has fallen, what do you do?" "I assess the damage. I determine what can be salvaged and what must be replaced. I clear away what is broken beyond repair, then I rebuild." "And do you rebuild exactly as it was before?" Eliam considered. "Not always. Sometimes the original design had flaws. Sometimes the materials were not suitable. Sometimes the foundation was inadequate. A wise builder learns from what failed and creates something stronger." "A wise builder?" Azariah repeated softly. "Yes. And does this not also apply to human hearts?" Eliam stiffened. "I did not come here to be lectured." "No. You came here to sit in darkness with broken things, which tells me more than any lecture could." The old man's voice was gentle, without judgment. "I lost my wife 30 years ago. The pain nearly killed me. I thought I would never feel whole again." Despite his resistance, Eliam found himself asking, "And did you feel whole again?" "I learned that wholeness is not the absence of cracks," Azariah said slowly. "It is the presence of something strong enough to hold the pieces together. Like mortar between stones, yes? Each stone remains itself, with all its edges and imperfections, but together they create something that can stand against the storm." "What held you together?" Eliam asked quietly. "The same thing that holds the stars in their courses," Azariah replied. "The same thing that brings forth the morning and sets boundaries for the seas. The same thing that numbers the hairs on your head and knows every sparrow that falls. The one who heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds." The words stirred something deep in Eliam's memory. fragments of psalms learned in childhood, words that had once brought comfort but now seemed like empty promises. "He did not heal them," Eliam said, and his voice broke. "I prayed, I begged, I pleaded, but he did not heal my wife or my daughter. So what good is a God who heals the broken-hearted but lets hearts break in the first place?" Azariah was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with compassion. "I cannot tell you why your family was taken. I cannot explain the mysteries of suffering or death. I can only tell you what I have learned in my own long walk through this world, that God's presence is not proven by the absence of pain, but by the presence of strength we did not know we possessed. That healing does not always mean the removal of wounds, but sometimes the ability to live with them, to let them become part of our story rather than the end of it." "I do not want them to be part of my story," Eliam said fiercely. "I want them back. I want to wake up and find this has all been a terrible dream. I want to hear my daughters laugh and see my wife smile. I want what I had, not some philosophical acceptance of loss." "Of course you do," Azariah said simply. "Love does not stop wanting. Love does not stop aching. But love also does not have to stop living. Your wife, Miriam, was it? Would she want you to become a ghost, haunting your own life?" Eliam stood abruptly. "You know nothing about what she would want." "You're right," Azariah agreed calmly. "But you do. You knew her. You loved her. You know in your deepest heart what she would say to you if she could. The question is whether you are brave enough to listen." Eliam wanted to walk away, to retreat back into his protective numbness, but his feet would not move. He stood there trembling as something inside him began to crack, as the wall he had so carefully built began to show its fissures, and from deep within his chest a sound emerged, a sob he had been holding back for 3 years, and then another, and then he was weeping, great shuddering gasps that shook his whole body. Azariah said nothing. He did not offer platitudes or try to stop the tears. He simply sat on his stone and let Eliam break. Let him finally release the grief that had been compressed and compacted and locked away for so long. The old man hummed softly, a melody Eliam dimly recognized as one of the Psalms, a sound that was both comforting and achingly sad. When the storm finally passed, when Eliam's tears were exhausted, he sank back onto the stone, emptied and strangely lighter. Azariah handed him a cloth to wipe his face, and they sat together in companionable silence as the night deepened around them. "The stars," Azariah said eventually, pointing upward. "Do you know how many there are?" Eliam looked up, seeing them scattered across the vast darkness like salt spilled on a black cloth. No one could count them all. No human could, Azariah agreed. And yet our sacred texts tell us that he determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Can you imagine? Each point of light known and named and placed exactly where it should be. Such attention to detail, such care for even the smallest sparks in the darkness. "What does that have to do with me?" Eliam asked tiredly. "If he cares so much for distant fires in the sky, how much more does he care for you? If he knows each star, does he not also know each tear you have shed? If he placed each light in the heavens, did he not also place each person in your life for a purpose, even if their time was shorter than you wished?" "That is cold comfort," Eliam said. "Yes," Azariah admitted. "The comfort of truth often feels cold at first, but like stone warmed by the sun, it holds that warmth long after night falls. The easy lies feel warm immediately, but offer no lasting strength." They sat in silence for a while longer, and Eliam felt something shifting in his understanding, like a key turning in a lock he had not known was there. He thought about the old woman, Hannah, and how she had refused to be scattered from her home. He thought about the cracked stone in the wall and Joash's gentle lesson. He thought about David's innocent question and his father's long-ago words about God's care for each person. Threads were weaving together, a pattern he could not quite see but could sense emerging. "What should I do?" he asked finally. "Tomorrow," Azariah said, "you will wake up. You will say your prayers, and perhaps this time you will mean a few more of the words. You will go to your work, and you will build, but you will also begin the harder work of rebuilding yourself, not by forgetting what you have lost, but by remembering that you are still alive, and that there are reasons for that. Small reasons at first, perhaps. A boy who needs teaching, an old woman who needs defending, a wall that needs your skill. But these small reasons accumulate, stone by stone, until one day you look up and realize you have built something worth standing in. And if I cannot, if the grief is too heavy, then you will ask for help carrying it. You will let others see you, truly see you, as you saw that woman today. You will stop building walls around your heart and start building bridges to the world again. Azariah stood slowly, leaning on his staff. "I must go. My old bones need rest, but I will leave you with something to consider. The psalm that has sustained me through my darkest nights. It says that the Lord heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. It says He determines the number of the stars and calls them by name. It says He lifts up the humble and casts the wicked to the ground. It says He covers the heavens with clouds and provides rain for the earth and makes grass grow on the hills. It speaks of a God who cares for everything, from the greatest lights in the heavens to the smallest needs on earth." Psalm 147, Eliam said softly, the words coming from some deep place in his memory. "Yes, perhaps you should read it again, not as a man who had faith before it was tested, but as a man whose faith is being rebuilt, stone by stone. The words may speak differently to you now." With that, Azariah began to walk away, his staff tapping rhythmically on the stone pavement. Eliam watched him go, this strange teacher who had appeared in the darkness and offered not answers, but questions, not solutions, but company in suffering. He sat for a while longer among the broken stones, and for the first time in 3 years, he did not feel entirely alone. The walk back to his room seemed shorter than usual. The streets were nearly empty now, most families settled in for the night. Through some windows, Eliam could see the warm glow of oil lamps, could hear the murmur of voices, the sounds of life continuing in its ordinary patterns. Once, these sights and sounds had filled him with bitter envy. Tonight, they simply reminded him that the world was still turning, still offering its small beauties, even in the midst of sorrow. In his room, Eliam lit his lamp and opened the small wooden chest where he kept his few precious possessions. Beneath his prayer shawl and phylacteries, he found what he was looking for, a small scroll, worn with age, containing portions of the Psalms that his father had copied for him when he came of age. He had not opened it since Miriam's death, could not bear to read words about God's goodness and faithfulness when he felt so abandoned. But now, with Azariah's words still echoing in his mind, he unrolled the scroll carefully and found Psalm 147. The letters were faded but still legible, written in his father's careful hand. He began to read, slowly, letting each word settle in his mind. Praise the Lord. How good it is to sing praises to our God. How pleasant and fitting to praise Him. Eliam paused, Was it still good to praise? Could he honestly sing when his heart felt so heavy? But he continued reading. The Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers the exiles of Israel. Gathers, that word again. God as the one who gathers what has been scattered, who brings together what has been separated. He thought of Hannah, how he had spoken without knowing it about gathering what should not be scattered. Was there something in him that remembered these words, that drew on them even when his conscious mind had forgotten? He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. There it was, the verse Azariah had quoted. Eliam touched the words gently, as if they might dissolve under his fingers. Heals the brokenhearted. Was his heart broken or merely hardened? Was there a difference? And what did it mean to have wounds bound up? Did it mean they would disappear, or simply that they would be kept from bleeding out, covered, but still present? He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. The same stars he had looked at tonight, scattered across the darkness in their numberless thousands, each one known, each one named. The vastness of that knowledge, the impossibility of that attention to detail. If God could know each distant fire in the sky, could track each light across the heavens, then surely he had known Miriam and Abigail, had held their names in his mind, just as he held the names of stars. Great is our Lord, and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit, not bound by Eliam's comprehension, not constrained by what seemed fair or right to human thinking. An understanding that encompassed more than he could see or grasp. It was not an answer, not really, but it was something, an acknowledgement that his perspective was finite, that there might be purposes and patterns beyond his pain. Eliam read through the rest of the psalm, each verse offering different images. God covering the heavens with clouds, providing rain for the earth, giving food to the cattle and the young ravens, care extending to all creation, from the cosmic to the commonplace. The psalm praised God for his word running swiftly, for snow like wool and frost like ashes, for sending his command and melting the ice. It spoke of revelation to Jacob, of statutes and laws to Israel, of a particular people chosen for a particular purpose. When he reached the end, praise the Lord, Eliam sat back, the scroll still in his hands. He did not feel suddenly transformed. The grief had not vanished. The questions had not been answered. But something had shifted nonetheless, some small loosening of the tight knot of bitterness he had carried for so long. Perhaps it was exhaustion from the day's unexpected events, from the tears he had finally shed, from the encounter with Azariah and his gentle wisdom. Or perhaps it was the first small crack in his isolation, the beginning of a thaw. He rolled up the scroll carefully and returned it to the chest. Then, wrapping himself in his cloak, he lay down on his sleeping mat and closed his eyes. Sleep came more easily than it had in months, and with it came dreams not of loss, but of building, of placing stone upon stone, of walls rising into something whole and strong. Morning arrived with the sound of roosters and the gradual brightening of the eastern sky. Eliam woke feeling not refreshed exactly, but less burdened, as if some weight had been redistributed in the night. He performed his morning prayers with more attention than usual, and when he came to the blessings, he found himself meaning them, at least a little. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who gives strength to the weary. Yes, he could believe that. He was weary, had been weary for 3 long years, and he needed strength beyond his own. At the construction site, the work continued as it had the day before, but Eliam found himself more aware of his surroundings, more present in the moment, rather than lost in dark thoughts. He worked alongside Benjamin, the other widower, and for the first time he found himself actually listening when the man spoke about his own journey through grief. "It never goes away entirely," Benjamin said as they fitted stones together. "My Ruth has been gone 15 years, and I still sometimes turn to tell her something before I remember. But the sharpness dulls. The memories become more sweet than bitter. You learn to carry it differently." "How?" Eliam asked simply. Benjamin considered as he tested the placement of a stone. "By not carrying it alone, by letting others help bear the weight, by building something with your life that would make them proud. My Ruth always wanted me to be happy, even more than she wanted me to be faithful in mourning. I honor her more by living well than by living miserably." It was similar to what Azariah had said, what David had suggested. The same message coming from different voices, as if the universe itself was trying to tell him something he had been refusing to hear. Eliam nodded slowly and returned to his work, but the words stayed with him. At midday, when the workers paused to eat and rest, Joash called Eliam aside. "The merchant came by this morning," he said. "He heard about yesterday's incident with the old woman." Eliam braced himself for rebuke or dismissal. "I see." He was not pleased that his servant was sent away with his authority questioned. Joash paused, and a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "But he is not an unreasonable man. He met with the woman. They have come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "She will sell him a portion of her land, the part that borders his property. It will give him space for his courtyard. In return, he will repair her house and ensure she has provisions for the rest of her days." It is actually more generous than his original offer, though he will not admit it came from a sense of shame rather than kindness. Relief flooded through Eliam. "That is good. She will not be scattered from her home?" "No," Joash agreed. "She will not be scattered. And you, my friend, showed courage yesterday in speaking for someone who had no voice. Your father would have been proud." The mention of his father brought a pang to Eliam's chest, but it was not entirely painful. There was sweetness mixed with the sorrow, memory of his father's gentle strength, his commitment to justice, his belief that a builder's work was not just about structures, but about creating spaces where people could flourish. "He taught me that our work matters beyond the stones we place," Eliam said quietly. "He did. And perhaps it is time you remembered that lesson in all areas of your life." The words hung between them, and Eliam nodded slowly. Something was shifting inside him, like stones being carefully repositioned, like a wall being rebuilt with greater care and stronger mortar. The afternoon sun was gentler now, the heat beginning to ease. Eliam returned to his work, but he found himself more aware of the people around him. He listened when David asked questions, answering with patience he had not shown before. He shared water with Benjamin during the break, and they spoke quietly about their wives, about memory and loss, and the unexpected ways grief could transform into something else. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of peaceful acceptance. As the day drew toward evening, a commotion at the site entrance drew everyone's attention. Hannah was there, the old woman from the day before, and she was carrying a basket covered with a cloth. She looked around uncertainly until her eyes found Eliam. "Forgive the interruption," she called out, her voice thin but steady. "I have brought food for the workers. It is little enough, but I wanted to thank you." Joash smiled and gestured her forward. "You honor us, Mother. Please come." Hannah made her way to the center of the site, and the workers gathered around as she uncovered the basket. Inside were fresh loaves of bread, still warm, and a clay jar of honey. The smell was intoxicating, and Eliam's stomach reminded him again that he had neglected to eat properly. "I baked this morning," Hannah explained. "It is not much, but it is made with gratitude. You stood for me when I had no voice. You reminded that merchant servant that I am a person, not merely an obstacle to be removed. For that, I am grateful." The workers murmured their thanks and began breaking bread together. It was an impromptu meal, unplanned and informal, but there was something sacred about it nonetheless. Eliam found himself sitting beside Hannah, and she looked at him with eyes that had seen much sorrow, but had not lost their kindness. "You have known loss," he said quietly. It was not a question. Eliam was surprised by his own response. Instead of retreating into silence, instead of changing the subject, he simply nodded. "My wife and daughter, 3 years ago. A fever." "Ah," Hannah said, and in that single sound was a world of understanding. "I lost my Samuel 12 years ago, and before that, a son in childhood. The pain does not leave entirely, does it? But it changes shape. It becomes something we can carry, rather than something that carries us." "How did you manage it?" Eliam asked. "How did you keep living?" Hannah broke off a piece of bread and handed it to him. "I chose to remember that their lives were gifts, not possessions. That their time with me, however brief, was blessing, not something owed to me. And I chose to believe that the same God who gave them to me knew when to call them home, and that his timing, however mysterious and painful, was not cruelty, but wisdom I could not yet understand." "That is difficult to accept," Eliam said. "Yes," Hannah agreed. "It took me years, and some days I still struggle. But the alternative, to live in bitterness, to curse the one who gives all good things because he also allows all hard things, that path leads only to a slow death of the spirit. I chose life, even when life hurt." They sat in companionable silence, eating the simple bread and honey. Around them, the other workers talked quietly, their voices creating a gentle murmur that blended with the evening sounds of the city. Birds called to each other as they settled for the night. Somewhere in the distance, someone was singing. The air cooled, and with it came a sense of peace that Eliam had not felt in longer than he could remember. When the bread was gone and the workers began to disperse, Hannah stood and placed a weathered hand on Eliam's shoulder. "Thank you again, Builder. You gave me more than you know. Sometimes we need someone to see us, truly see us, to remember that we matter. You did that for me. I pray someone does that for you." After she left, Eliam remained sitting for a moment, watching the sun sink lower toward the western hills. The sky was ablaze with color, deep oranges and rich purples, and that particular shade of gold that only appeared in Jerusalem's skies. He thought about Hannah's words, about being seen, about choosing life even when life hurt. That night, as he walked home through the darkening streets, Eliam found himself taking a different route, one that led past the synagogue. Through the windows, he could see men gathering for evening prayers, their voices rising in familiar chants. He paused outside, listening. The words were ones he had learned as a boy, words his father had taught him, words that spoke of God's faithfulness and steadfast love. On impulse, Eliam pushed open the door and entered. A few heads turned, surprised to see him. It had been years since he had attended communal prayers, but no one questioned his presence. He found a place near the back and joined his voice to theirs, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. The Hebrew words felt strange on his tongue, like a language he had almost forgotten. But as he continued, they became familiar again, comfortable, like coming home after a long absence. When the prayers concluded, an elderly rabbi approached him. Eliam, son of Matthias, the rabbi said warmly. It has been too long. We have missed you. I have been away, Eliam said carefully. Away in body or spirit? The rabbi asked gently. Both, perhaps, but I think I am finding my way back. The rabbi nodded knowingly. The path of return is not always straight. Sometimes we must wander in the wilderness before we can appreciate the promised land. Sometimes we must sit in darkness before we can understand the value of light. Come, walk with me. They stepped outside together, and the rabbi led Eliam to a small courtyard beside the synagogue, where a few olive trees grew. The old man settled onto a bench and gestured for Eliam to join him. I knew your father well, the rabbi said. He was a good man, skilled in his craft and faithful in his spirit. He taught you the words of the Psalms, did he not? He did, though I have not thought much about them in recent years. Ah, but the words do not forget us, even when we forget them. They wait patiently like seeds in dry ground, ready to sprout when the rain finally comes. The rabbi looked up at the emerging stars. Tell me, do you remember Psalm 147? Eliam was startled. It was the second time that Psalm had been mentioned to him in as many days. Some of it, Azariah spoke of it last night. Azariah, the rabbi smiled. A fine teacher. Then you know the verse about God healing the broken-hearted and binding up their wounds? I know it. I am not sure I believe it. Honest doubt is better than false certainty, the rabbi said approvingly. But let me ask you this. What does it mean to be healed? Does it mean the wound never happened? Or does it mean finding a way to live fully despite the wound? Eliam considered. I suppose the second. A wound that never happened would mean my wife and daughter never existed. I would not wish that despite the pain of losing them. Exactly so. God's healing is not erasure. It is integration. It is learning to carry our wounds without being defined by them. It is allowing our broken places to become sources of compassion rather than bitterness. Is that what happened to you? Eliam asked, noticing for the first time the deep sadness that lived behind the rabbi's eyes. I lost 2 daughters to sickness many years ago, the rabbi said quietly. I understand your pain more than you might think, and I can tell you that what felt impossible, continuing to live, continuing to serve, continuing to believe, became possible one day at a time, one small choice at a time. They sat together as the darkness deepened, and the rabbi began to recite Psalm 147 in its entirety, his voice carrying the ancient words into the night air. Eliam listened, and this time the words did not feel empty. They felt like a bridge, connecting his pain to something larger, something that had sustained his ancestors through countless trials and tribulations. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name, the rabbi intoned. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. Eliam looked up at those stars scattered across the vast darkness, each one a fire burning in the void, each one known and named by a creator who cared enough to count them. If such attention was given to distant lights, what attention might be given to human hearts? What care might be extended to human pain? It was not an answer, not really, but it was something, a possibility. A door that had been closed beginning to crack open. There's part 2, the journey. Wave 1, the desert of testing. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the air crisp with the promise of another hot day. Eliam woke feeling different, though he could not quite name the change. It was as if some weight had been slightly redistributed, not removed, but carried differently, more evenly across his shoulders. He went through his morning rituals with more awareness, speaking each prayer word by word, rather than rushing through them mechanically. When he came to the blessing for the new day, he paused and actually meant it. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who renews creation each morning. Each morning was indeed new, each day a fresh start, even for someone carrying yesterday's grief. At the construction site, the work continued its steady rhythm. The walls rose higher, course by course. Eliam found himself teaching David more actively, explaining not just the technique of placing stones, but the philosophy behind it. "Do you see this corner?" he said, guiding the young man's hand to feel the junction of two walls. "This is where all the force comes together. If we build it strong here, the entire structure is strengthened. If we allow weakness here, everything suffers." "Like the foundation," David said, eager to show his learning. "Yes, but also different. The foundation bears the weight from below. The corner channels the force from multiple directions. Both are critical, but in different ways." Eliam paused, realizing he was speaking about more than masonry. It is the same with people. Some of us are foundations. We provide the stable base that others build upon. Others are corners. We connect different parts. We hold things together at the stress points. Both are necessary. Both are valuable. David looked at him with newfound respect. "You are a corner, Master Eliam. You held together the structure of this project when you defended the old woman. You connected her need with our work and found a way to honor both." The observation surprised Eliam, and he felt a flush of unexpected pleasure. Perhaps he was beginning to function again, not just as a worker, but as a member of a community, someone who contributed more than just labor. As the days passed, Eliam found himself emerging slowly from his isolation. He began eating lunch with the other workers rather than apart from them. He listened to their stories, Benjamin's memories of his late wife, Joash's concerns about his aging mother, David's dreams of one day building something magnificent. Each story was a thread, and together they wove a tapestry of ordinary human life, full of joy and sorrow, hope and disappointment, loss and resilience. One afternoon, nearly a week after his encounter with Azariah, Eliam was approached by a man he did not recognize. The stranger was travel-worn, his robe dusty from the road, his face lined with exhaustion. "Are you Eliam the builder?" the man asked. "I am. I bring word from Bethlehem. Your uncle Simeon has fallen ill. He asks for you." Eliam's heart clenched. Simeon was his father's brother, the only close family Eliam had left. They had not seen each other since the funeral 3 years ago. Eliam had withdrawn from everyone, even family, but the bond remained strong nonetheless. "How ill?" Eliam asked quietly. "The physician says he has little time, days, perhaps a week. He wishes to speak with you before—" The man did not finish, but he did not need to. Eliam understood. Another loss approaching, another goodbye to face. For a moment, the old panic rose in his chest, the urge to refuse, to protect himself from more pain. But then he thought of Hannah's words, "I chose life, even when life hurt." And he thought of the psalm, "The Lord heals the broken-hearted." Perhaps healing meant not avoiding pain, but learning to walk through it. "I will come," Eliam said. "I need to make arrangements with the foreman." Joash was understanding when Eliam explained the situation. "Of course you must go. Family is more important than walls. We will manage here. Take as long as you need." "Thank you. I hope to return within a week." "Return when you are ready," Joash said, gripping Eliam's shoulder. And Eliam, perhaps this journey is not just about saying goodbye. Perhaps it is also about finding your way forward. Eliam prepared quickly. He gathered his few possessions, his prayer shawl, a change of clothes, a water skin, some bread and dried fruit for the journey. He strapped on his sandals and took up his walking staff. The journey to Bethlehem would take most of a day on foot, through the hills of Judea, through terrain he had not traveled in years. As he left Jerusalem through the southern gate, Eliam felt an unexpected sense of anticipation. Yes, he was walking toward grief, toward another loss. But he was also walking somewhere, moving forward rather than standing still. For 3 years he had been frozen in place, locked in the moment of his greatest pain. Now, for the first time, he was taking steps, literal, physical steps, away from that frozen moment. The road south from Jerusalem was ancient, worn by countless feet over countless generations. Eliam walked steadily, the rhythm of his steps becoming a kind of meditation. Around him, the landscape of Judea unfolded in familiar patterns. Rocky hillsides dotted with olive trees, terraced vineyards clinging to steep slopes, valleys where shepherds moved their flocks, searching for patches of grass among the stones. The morning was cool, but as the sun climbed higher, the heat began to build. Eliam stopped at a spring he remembered from childhood journeys, filling his water skin and drinking deeply. The water was cold and clean, and he remembered his father bringing him here, teaching him to identify the signs of good water sources, explaining how life always found a way even in harsh places. "Look at these plants," his father had said, pointing to the green growth around the spring. "They survive here because they have found the source. They send their roots deep, down to where the water flows. That is how we must be, my son. Not like grass that withers when the sun is hot, but like trees planted by streams of water that yield fruit in season and whose leaves do not wither." It was a teaching from the Psalms, Eliam realized now. His father had taught him wisdom through the landscape itself, using the physical world to illustrate spiritual truths. How much he had forgotten, how much he was beginning to remember. As he continued walking, the terrain became more rugged. The road wound through a series of narrow valleys, steep-sided wadis, where flash floods could turn deadly during the rainy season. Now, in late summer, they were bone dry, the stones bleached white by the sun. It was beautiful in its own stark way, this landscape that had shaped his ancestors for generations. Eliam passed other travelers on the road, merchants with donkeys laden with goods, pilgrims heading to Jerusalem for the upcoming festival, shepherds moving flocks between pastures. Each one greeted him with the traditional shalom, and Eliam found himself returning the greeting with genuine warmth rather than the mechanical response he had given for years. Near midday, he overtook an elderly couple moving slowly, the man leaning heavily on a staff while his wife supported his other arm. They were struggling, clearly exhausted, and without thinking, Eliam stopped. "Are you well, grandfather?" he asked respectfully. The old man looked up, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Well enough, young man, but the road is longer than I remembered, and my legs are not what they once were. We are traveling to Bethlehem to see our daughter before—" He paused, and his wife squeezed his arm gently. "Before I go to join my fathers," the man finished simply. "The physician says my time is short. I want to see her once more to give her my blessing." Eliam felt a sharp pang of recognition. Here was another family facing loss, another goodbye approaching, and yet these two moved forward with a quiet dignity, accepting what could not be changed while cherishing what remained. "I am also going to Bethlehem," Eliam said. "May I walk with you? The road is easier with company." The couple accepted gratefully, and they continued together at a slower pace. The old man's name was Nathan, and his wife was called Leah. They had been married 47 years, they told him. 47 years of joys and sorrows. Children born and grandchildren dandled, harvests celebrated, and famines endured. Health and sickness, plenty and want. "But we have had each other," Leah said softly, looking at her husband with eyes that still held love despite the grief of impending loss. "That has made all the difference. Were you never angry?" Eliam found himself asking. "When hard times came, when sickness or trouble visited your house, did you never question why?" Nathan considered the question carefully, his steps slow but steady. "Angry? Yes, sometimes. Questioning? Often. But I learned that anger and questions are not the same as abandoning faith. God is big enough to handle our anger. The Psalms are full of complaints and questions. What matters is what we do with those feelings. Do we let them make us bitter, or do we work through them to find understanding? And did you find understanding?" "Not always," Nathan admitted. "Some things remain mysteries, but I found something perhaps more important. Trust. Not blind trust that ignores reality, but deep trust that there is a purpose even when I cannot see it, that there is a hand guiding even when the path seems random." They walked on in silence for a while, and Eliam found himself marveling at this chance encounter. Was it truly chance, or was there, as Nathan suggested, a hand that guided even these seemingly random meetings on a dusty road? At a shaded spot where several large stones provided natural seats, they stopped to rest and share food. Leah produced bread and cheese from her bundle, and Eliam contributed his dried fruit. They ate slowly, savoring the simple food and the brief respite from the sun's intensity. "Why do you travel to Bethlehem?" Leah asked gently. "You mentioned family? My uncle is dying. He has asked for me." Eliam hesitated, then added, "I have not been a good nephew these past years. I withdrew from everyone after my wife and daughter died. I am not sure what I will say to him." "Say what is in your heart," Nathan advised. "The dying have little patience for pretense. They want truth, even painful truth, but they also want love and reconciliation and peace. Give him those things." "What if I do not have them to give?" "Then ask him to give them to you," Leah said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone who is dying is the chance to bless us one final time, to leave us with wisdom and encouragement. Let him give you that gift." Her words struck deep. Eliam had been thinking of this journey only as obligation, as duty to a dying relative. But perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps it was an opportunity, one last chance to receive his uncle's blessing, to hear his wisdom, to allow the older generation to pass something precious to the younger before departing. They rested for perhaps half an hour and then continued their journey. The road descended gradually toward Bethlehem, and as the afternoon wore on, the landscape became slightly more lush. There were more trees here, more cultivation, more signs of human habitation. Bethlehem was smaller than Jerusalem, but prosperous, known for its terraced fields and abundant harvests. As they approached the town in the late afternoon, Nathan and Leah turned toward the eastern side, where their daughter lived, while Eliam's path took him toward the western quarter, where his uncle's house stood. They parted with mutual blessings, and Eliam felt genuine sadness at saying goodbye to these two who had shared their journey and their wisdom so generously. "May the Lord bless you and keep you," Nathan said, placing a weathered hand on Eliam's head in benediction. "May his face shine upon you and give you peace. And may your reunion with your daughter be joyful," Eliam responded. "May your final days be filled with love and peace." He watched them walk away, leaning on each other, two lives so intertwined that they moved as one. He wondered if they would both survive the separation that death would bring, or if, as sometimes happened with couples married many decades, one would quickly follow the other. There was something both beautiful and heartbreaking about a love so deep that it transcended the boundary between life and death. Eliam made his way through the narrow streets of Bethlehem, the town waking from its afternoon rest. Children played in the alleys, women gathered at the well to draw water for the evening meal, men returned from the fields with tools over their shoulders. It was the rhythm of ordinary life, the daily pattern that had continued unchanged for generations. His uncle's house was modest but well maintained, built of the same honey-colored limestone that characterized all the buildings in this region. Eliam stood outside for a moment, gathering his courage, then knocked firmly on the door. It was opened by a woman he recognized as his uncle's neighbor, a widow named Ruth, who had looked after Simeon since his own wife had passed several years ago. Her face showed both recognition and relief. "Eliam, blessed be God, you have come. He has been asking for you constantly. Come, quickly. He is very weak." She led him through the courtyard and into the house. The interior was dim and cool, the windows shuttered against the heat. In the main room, on a low bed, lay his uncle Simeon. Eliam was shocked by the change in him. The robust man he remembered had been reduced to a frail shadow, his skin pale and paper-thin, his breathing shallow and labored. But when Simeon saw Eliam, his eyes lit with joy, and he tried to sit up. "No, uncle, rest," Eliam said quickly, kneeling beside the bed and taking the old man's hand. It felt like bird bones wrapped in parchment. "I am here. Be at peace." "Eliam," Simeon whispered, his voice barely audible, "my brother's son, you came. I feared you would not." "I am sorry it took so long," Eliam said, and to his surprise, tears were running down his face. "I am sorry I stayed away. I was lost in my grief, and I forgot that others were grieving too. Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," Simeon said gently. "Grief takes us all differently. Your father understood that. He would not judge you, and neither do I." He paused to catch his breath, the effort of speaking clearly taxing him. "But I am glad you came now. I have things to tell you, things your father wanted you to know. Save your strength, uncle. We have time." "No." Simeon shook his head slightly. "We do not, and that is well. My time here is finished, but yours is not, and you must hear what I have to say." Ruth brought water and helped Simeon drink, then discreetly withdrew, leaving uncle and nephew alone. The afternoon light slanted through the shutters, creating bars of gold across the floor. Somewhere outside, a dove cooed its evening song. The world continued its rhythms even here, even in this room where death was drawing near. "Your father," Simeon began, speaking slowly to conserve his failing strength, "loved you more than anything in this world. When you were born, he wept with joy. He said you were his psalm of praise made flesh. Do you remember how he would sing to you?" Eliam did remember, suddenly and vividly, his father rocking him as a child, singing the psalms in his rich, deep voice. Those songs had been Eliam's first lessons in faith, delivered through love and melody. "He told me once," Simeon continued, "that his greatest prayer was that you would know both joy and sorrow, because joy alone makes us shallow, but sorrow alone makes us bitter. Together they make us fully human, able to comfort others with the comfort we ourselves have received." "I have had plenty of sorrow," Eliam said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Yes, and it has made you compassionate. I heard what you did for the old woman in Jerusalem, standing up for her, defending her home. That is the man your father hoped you would become, someone who uses his own pain to prevent pain in others. I did not feel particularly noble. I could not stand to see her scattered from her home." "Exactly," Simeon smiled weakly. "That is nobility, not the grand gesture, but the small act of seeing another's need and meeting it. He paused again for breath, and Eliam waited patiently. Your father also told me that if you ever lost your way, I should remind you of Psalm 147. Do you remember it? I have been reminded of it recently, Eliam said, but I struggle to believe its promises. Belief is not the absence of doubt, Simeon said. It is the choice to trust, even when we do not understand, even when we hurt. Your wife, Miriam, she believed that way. Do you remember? Eliam did remember. Miriam's faith had been simple and deep, uncomplicated by the questions that plagued him. She had trusted God with a childlike confidence that he had sometimes envied. She would not want you to stop living, Simeon continued, echoing the words others had spoken. She would want you to honor her memory by loving again, by building again, by opening your heart, even though it might break again, because hearts that never open never truly live. What if I cannot? Eliam whispered. What if the fear is too great? Then you ask for help, Simeon said simply. You let others carry you when you are too weak to walk. You trust that the God who heals the brokenhearted knows how to heal your particular break. He determines the number of stars, and he knows the number of your tears. None of them are wasted. They sat in silence for a while, Simeon's breathing growing more labored. Ruth came in with oil lamps as the daylight faded, and the room filled with soft, warm light. She brought broth for Simeon, but he could manage only a few sips. As night fell completely, Simeon seemed to rally slightly, finding a reserve of energy from somewhere deep within. Eliam, he said, his voice surprisingly clear, I want to give you my blessing, the blessing of a father, since your own is with God. Will you receive it? Eliam knelt beside the bed, his head bowed, tears streaming freely now. He felt his uncle's thin hand rest on his head, warm and light as a bird. The Lord bless you and keep you, Simeon intoned, his voice gaining strength from ancient words. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. He paused, then added in his own words, May you find healing for your broken heart. May you rebuild what grief has torn down. May you learn to carry joy and sorrow together, and may they make you wise. May you love again, deeply and without fear. And may you always remember that you are known and loved by the one who numbers the stars and calls them each by name. Amen. Amen, Eliam whispered. They remained like that for a long moment, and Eliam felt something profound settling into his soul, like a seed planted deep in good soil. The blessing was not magic that would instantly heal all wounds, but it was permission. Permission to move forward, permission to live again, permission to let go of guilt and embrace hope. When Simeon's hand finally lifted from his head, Eliam looked up and saw peace on his uncle's face. The old man smiled. Thank you for coming. You have given me a great gift. Now I can go, knowing that you will be all right, that you will not let grief destroy the beautiful man you are meant to be. Thank you, Uncle, Eliam managed through his tears. Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for your blessing. I will carry it always. Simeon nodded weakly and closed his eyes. His breathing grew quieter, more shallow. Eliam stayed beside him, holding his hand, keeping vigil as the night deepened around them. Ruth sat on the other side, her hands folded in prayer, her lips moving silently. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, when the stars were bright overhead and the world was still, Simeon took a last gentle breath and was gone. It was peaceful, quiet, like falling asleep. One moment he was there, the next he had crossed that invisible threshold into whatever lay beyond. Ruth wept softly, and Eliam found himself weeping too. But it was different from the bitter, angry tears he had shed for Miriam and Abigail. These tears were sad but clean, acknowledging loss without being consumed by it. Simeon had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had passed his wisdom to the next generation. His death, while sorrowful, felt complete in a way that his wife's and daughters had not. They sat with the body through the rest of the night, as was proper, keeping the vigil, reciting psalms and prayers. As dawn approached, others began to arrive, neighbors and friends who had heard the news, who came to help prepare the body and arrange the burial. The house filled with quiet activity, with rituals that had been performed for thousands of years, connecting this single death to the long chain of human mortality and continuity. The burial took place that morning, before the heat of the day. The body was washed and wrapped in clean linen, anointed with oils and spices. They carried Simeon to the family tomb, a cave carved into the hillside outside the town, where generations of his ancestors lay. The opening was sealed with a large stone, and the mourners stood in the early light, speaking prayers and remembrances. Eliam spoke briefly, his voice steady, despite his grief. My uncle Simeon was a righteous man who lived his faith every day. He showed me kindness when I had withdrawn from the world. He gave me his blessing when I did not deserve it. He reminded me of truths I had forgotten, and he sent me back into the world with permission to live fully again. May his memory be a blessing. May his memory be a blessing, the others echoed. They returned to the house for the meal of mourning, and Eliam found himself surrounded by people eager to share stories of Simeon, his generosity, his humor, his quiet faith, his steady presence in the community. Each story added a facet to Eliam's understanding of his uncle, revealing a life lived well and fully, despite inevitable sorrows and losses. As the day wore on, people began to depart. Eliam helped Ruth with the final preparations, ensuring she would be cared for in the coming weeks. She insisted he take some of Simeon's possessions, his prayer shawl, a scroll of the Psalms, and a small carved olive wood box that had belonged to Eliam's father. He wanted you to have these, Ruth said. He said you would know when the time was right to receive them. Eliam opened the box carefully. Inside was a collection of small treasures, a lock of hair from Eliam's first haircut as a child, a smooth stone from the stream where his father had taught him to fish, a dried flower that Miriam had worn at their wedding, and a small scroll. Eliam unrolled it carefully and recognized his father's handwriting. Psalm 147, copied out in full with a note at the bottom in Hebrew. For Eliam, when the time comes to rebuild. Remember, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. You are known. You are loved. You are not forgotten. Your father, Matthias. Eliam read the words through tear-blurred eyes, then carefully rolled the scroll and returned it to the box. It was time to stop merely existing and start truly living again. Time to take the stones of his grief and begin building something new from them, not forgetting what he had lost, but honoring it by moving forward. He stayed one more night in Bethlehem, sleeping in his uncle's house, surrounded by the sounds and smells of the place where his father had grown up. In the morning, he prepared for the journey back to Jerusalem. Ruth packed him food for the road and blessed him with tears in her eyes. Go with God, Eliam, and remember, Simeon's last words to me were about you. He said, tell him not to be afraid to build again. A good builder knows that every structure begins with a single stone placed with intention. Tell him to place that first stone. Eliam embraced her gratefully, then set out on the road northward. The morning was cool and pleasant, the sky a deep, perfect blue. As he walked, he found himself thinking about stones and structures, about foundations and corners, about building and rebuilding. His whole life had been shaped by the work of construction, taking scattered, rough materials and transforming them into something ordered, purposeful, beautiful. Why had he never applied that wisdom to his own life? Why had he let himself remain scattered, unordered, broken? Because rebuilding required faith that the new structure would stand. It required accepting that the old one was gone. It required the courage to begin again, knowing that nothing built by human hands or human hearts lasted forever, but that the building itself mattered nonetheless. As he walked, the road climbed back into the hills. Here and there, he passed flocks of sheep grazing on sparse vegetation, their shepherd's pipes ascending lonely, beautiful melodies across the valleys. He thought of Psalm 23, another of the shepherd psalms. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. And making it whole again, not by denial, but by integration. The cracks would always be there, but perhaps they could become places where light entered, as the old teacher Azariah might say. The road climbed steadily, and Eliam found himself falling into the rhythm of walking meditation his father had taught him long ago. Left foot, right foot, breath in, breath out. The body's simple needs, water, rest, movement, became prayers in themselves. He was grateful for the physical exertion, for the way it grounded him in the present moment rather than leaving him adrift in memories or anxieties. By midday, he reached a high point in the road where the land opened up before him. To the north, he could just make out the walls of Jerusalem, golden in the sunlight. To the east, the mountains of Moab rose purple in the distance. To the west, the land descended toward the coastal plain, and all around, the hills of Judea rolled like waves frozen in stone, terraced and cultivated wherever possible, wild and beautiful, where the rock was too stubborn for human hands to shape. Eliam sat on a flat stone beside the road and unwrapped the food Ruth had given him. Bread and cheese, olives and dried figs. Simple food, but it tasted extraordinary in this moment, here in this place. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching the shadows of clouds drift across the valleys below. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, and Eliam watched its effortless flight with something like envy. To be so free, so unburdened, carried by forces larger than itself. But then he reconsidered. Was the hawk truly free? It was bound by hunger, by the need to hunt, by the cycles of the seasons and the availability of prey. Its freedom was not absence of constraint, but the ability to work within those constraints with grace and skill. Perhaps that was the kind of freedom he needed to seek, not escape from the realities of life and loss, but the ability to navigate them with wisdom and resilience. As he sat there, another traveler appeared on the road, approaching from the south. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, carrying a bundle on her back and walking with the confident stride of someone who knew the road well. She greeted him with a smile as she drew near. "Shalom, brother. May I share your resting place?" "Shalom. Please, sit." Eliam gestured to another stone nearby. She set down her bundle with a grateful sigh and accepted the water skin he offered. After drinking deeply, she returned it with thanks. "You are traveling to Jerusalem." "Yes." "And you?" "Also. I go to offer thanks at the temple. God has been gracious to me." Her face lit up with joy. "I was barren for 5 years of marriage. My husband's family whispered that he should divorce me, that I was cursed, but he would not. He said he had married me, not my womb, and he would love me regardless. And then, 3 months ago, I discovered I was with child. She placed a hand on her belly, still flat beneath her robe, but her whole being seemed to radiate happiness. So I go to give thanks, to make the proper offerings, to sing my gratitude before the Lord. Eliam felt something twist in his chest. Not the bitter jealousy he might have felt a week ago, but a more complex emotion. Joy for her, certainly, but also a poignant reminder of what he had lost. Miriam had been pregnant with their second child when the fever came. They had lost not only who she was, but who she would have been, who they would have been together. The young woman seemed to sense his shift in mood. "I am sorry," she said gently. "Have I caused you pain with my joy?" "No," Eliam said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Your joy is precious. Do not apologize for it. I lost my wife and daughter several years ago. Your news brings back memories, but that is not your fault. And I am learning that perhaps I can hold both things at once, my grief and your joy. They do not cancel each other out." "You are very wise," she said softly. Eliam laughed, a short, slightly bitter sound. "I am only beginning to learn what wisdom might look like. But thank you." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, and then the young woman began to hum. The melody was familiar, a psalm of thanksgiving, one that Eliam had heard sung in the temple courts countless times. After a moment, she began to sing the words softly. "I will praise you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of all your wonders. I will be glad and rejoice in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High." Her voice was clear and sweet, carrying easily in the open air. Eliam found himself joining in, his voice rusty from disuse, but growing stronger as the words came back to him. "The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name will trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you." The words resonated differently now than they had before. He had felt forsaken, had believed that God had abandoned him in his darkest hour. But perhaps the forsaking had been more mutual. Perhaps he had turned away as much as he had felt turned away from. Perhaps God had been there all along, waiting patiently for Eliam to be ready to turn back. When the song ended, they sat in the settling silence, and Eliam felt something loosening in his chest, some knot of tension he had not even realized he was carrying. The young woman smiled at him with such genuine warmth that he felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "I did not know how much I needed to sing." "Music is its own prayer," she replied. "Sometimes our hearts can say in song what they cannot say in words." They parted ways shortly after, she continuing north and he following at a slower pace, content to let her move ahead. But her song stayed with him, running through his mind like a stream of clear water, washing away some of the accumulated grit of grief and bitterness. Wave 2, Encounters and Revelations. Section A, The Village of Questions. By late afternoon, Eliam approached a small village perched on a hillside. He had been here before, years ago, but could barely remember it. The village was called Bethany, not the Bethany near Jerusalem where his friend Lazarus lived, but a smaller settlement sharing the name. It was a place of perhaps 50 families, clustered around a central well, their homes built of the same limestone that formed the bones of the land itself. As he entered the village, he noticed a commotion near the well. A group of men were arguing, their voices raised in dispute. Eliam's first instinct was to avoid involvement, to find a quiet corner where he could rest for the night without engaging with other people's troubles. But something, perhaps the memory of Hannah and how he had stepped forward when she needed help, made him pause and listen. "The well is not your property alone, Tobias," one man was saying, his face flushed with anger. "It belongs to the village. Your sheep cannot have priority over our family's water. My flocks are the livelihood of 20 families," Tobias shot back. "Without them, half this village would starve. Of course they have priority." "So your sheep matter more than our children?" "I did not say that. Do not put words in my mouth." An older man, clearly an elder of the village, raised his hands for peace. "Brothers, please, we have shared this well for generations. Surely we can find a way to share it now." "The well is running lower than usual," another voice interjected. "The spring rains were light this year. There may not be enough for all." This caused a ripple of concern through the gathered crowd. Water was life, especially in this dry land. A failing well was not just an inconvenience, but a potential disaster. Eliam found himself thinking of Psalm 147, of the verses about God providing rain for the earth, making grass grow on the hills. He thought of the streams and springs he had passed on his journey, each one a gift, a grace note in an otherwise harsh landscape, and he thought of how easily abundance could turn to scarcity, how quickly cooperation could give way to competition. Without fully intending to, he found himself speaking. "Forgive me. I am a stranger here and have no right to speak. But I am a builder by trade, and I know something about wells and water systems." The men turned to look at him, and Tobias scowled. "This does not concern you, stranger." "Perhaps not," Eliam agreed calmly. "But if you will permit me to examine the well, I might be able to help. I ask nothing in return except a place to sleep tonight and a meal. If I cannot help, you are no worse off than before." The elder studied Eliam for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. We welcome your expertise. Come." They led him to the well, and Eliam looked down into its depths. The water level was indeed low, though not critically so. He examined the stone lining of the well, checking for cracks or blockages. Then he walked around the area, studying the lay of the land, noting the slight depressions where water might collect during rains, observing the patterns of erosion. "Your well is sound," he said finally, "but I think the spring that feeds it may be partially blocked. See here." He pointed to a spot some distance from the well, where the ground was damp despite the lack of recent rain. "Water is surfacing here, which means it is being diverted underground, probably by rockfall or accumulated debris. Can it be cleared?" the elder asked. "Possibly. It would require digging down to the spring channel and removing the blockage. It is hard work, and there is no guarantee of success, but I have seen it done before." "How long would it take?" Eliam considered. "With enough hands, perhaps 2 or 3 days. But you would need men willing to work together to set aside their disputes for the common good." Tobias and his opponent looked at each other, and something unspoken passed between them. Then, slowly, Tobias extended his hand. "For the sake of the village, I will work alongside you, Samuel. We can argue later about water rights. First, let us ensure there is water to argue about." Samuel gripped his hand firmly. "Agreed." Over the next 3 days, Eliam found himself leading a work crew of village men, digging carefully to expose the underground spring channel. It was exhausting work, made harder by the need to shore up the excavation as they went to prevent collapse. But there was also something deeply satisfying about it. These men, who had been at each other's throats just days before, now worked side by side, passing tools and water, encouraging each other through the difficult labor. Eliam found himself teaching as they worked, explaining the principles of water flow and stonework, the same lessons his father had taught him. And he found that teaching helped him as much as it helped them. To articulate these principles, to pass on this knowledge, was to honor his father's memory, to keep alive a tradition that stretched back generations. On the afternoon of the second day, as they were resting in the shade, young Samuel asked him, "You speak of your father often. Was he a great builder?" "He was a good builder," Eliam corrected gently, "which is more important than being great. A great builder might construct a palace that all admire. A good builder constructs homes where families flourish, wells that serve communities, walls that protect the vulnerable. My father taught me that our work matters not because of its grandeur, but because of whom it serves." "And you?" Tobias asked. "What do you build?" Eliam was quiet for a moment. "I thought I built walls and houses, but I am learning that I have also been building walls around my heart, and those walls have served no one, least of all myself." "The walls around the heart are the hardest to tear down," the elder observed, "but also the most necessary." On the morning of the third day, they reached the spring channel and found it blocked exactly as Eliam had suspected. A collapse of limestone had diverted the water away from the well shaft. Working carefully, they removed the debris, stone by stone, until suddenly water surged through the cleared channel. A cheer went up from the workers as they watched the water level in the well begin to rise. That evening, the village held a celebration. Tables were set up in the square, and families brought food to share. Bread and the roasted lamb, cheese and olives, fresh vegetables from gardens, honey and dates, wine from the previous year's vintage. There was music and dancing, children running and playing, elders sitting and talking, the whole community coming together in gratitude. Eliam sat with the elder, whose name he had learned was Zechariah, and watched the celebration with a mixture of joy and wistfulness. This was what community looked like when it functioned as it should. People caring for each other, working together, celebrating shared blessings. It was what his own life had once included before grief had driven him into isolation. "You have given us a great gift," Zechariah said, refilling Eliam's wine cup. "Not just the well, but the unity. These men needed to be reminded that we are stronger together than divided." "I only showed them what was already there," Eliam replied. The spring was always flowing. It just needed to be uncovered. "Is that not also true of the human spirit?" Zechariah asked with a slight smile. "The source of life and joy is always there, even when blocked by the debris of pain and disappointment. Sometimes we need someone to help us clear away what obstructs the flow." Eliam nodded slowly. "I am beginning to understand that. My uncle reminded me of a psalm before he died, Psalm 147. It speaks of God healing the brokenhearted and binding up their wounds. I had always thought that meant the wounds would disappear. But perhaps it means learning to let life flow again, even around the wounds. Blessed are those who discover this while there is still time to live differently," Zechariah said. "Too many die with their hearts still blocked, their springs still buried. You are young enough to rebuild." Teachuk Section B, the encounter transformador. The next morning, Eliam prepared to continue his journey to Jerusalem. But before he could leave, Zechariah approached him with a request. "There is someone I would like you to meet before you go, a man who lives on the edge of the village. He rarely comes to the well or joins in communal life, but he is wise in ways that most of us are not. I think you would benefit from speaking with him." Intrigued, Eliam agreed. Zechariah led him to a small house set apart from the others, surrounded by a carefully tended garden. The scent of herbs filled the air, rosemary and hyssop, mint and sage, lavender and thyme. It was a place of quiet beauty. Every plant placed with intention, every stone in the garden path fitted with care. An old man sat on a bench in the garden, his eyes closed, face turned toward the morning sun. He was thin to the point of frailty, his skin weathered like ancient parchment, but there was a quality of peace about him that was almost tangible. "Simon," Zechariah said softly, "I have brought someone to meet you." The old man opened his eyes, and Eliam was startled to see that they were clouded with blindness. Yet somehow they seemed to see more than physical eyes could perceive. "Welcome," Simon said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Come, sit beside me. Zechariah, thank you for bringing him. I have been expecting this meeting." Zechariah nodded and withdrew, leaving them alone. Eliam sat on the bench beside Simon, unsure what to say. How could the old man have been expecting him when Eliam had not known he was coming here? "You wonder how I knew," Simon said with a faint smile. "I may be blind, but I have learned to see in other ways. I heard about the stranger who fixed the well, who taught the men to work together. And I heard something in the description that told me you were someone I needed to meet, someone who knows both how to build and how to be broken." "How did you know I was broken?" Eliam asked quietly. "Because the unbroken do not understand building the way you do. They see structures, walls, foundations. The broken see how things hold together despite their cracks, how even damaged stones can support weight if arranged properly. Tell me, what broke you?" And somehow, sitting in this peaceful garden with this blind stranger, Eliam found himself telling the whole story. Not the abbreviated version he had told others, but the full, painful truth of it. The fever that came suddenly, the desperate prayers, the moment he realized Miriam was slipping away, watching his daughter fade next, the double funeral, the 3 years of numbness and isolation that followed, his uncle's death and blessing, the journey he was on now, trying to find his way back to something like life. Simon listened without interruption, his face serene, occasionally nodding. When Eliam finished, there was a long silence broken only by birdsong and the whisper of wind through the herbs. "I lost my sight 30 years ago," Simon said finally. "Disease took it gradually over the course of a year. I was a scribe, a copier of sacred texts. My whole identity, my livelihood, my purpose, all of it depended on my ability to see. When my eyes failed, I wanted to die. I felt that God had taken everything that made life worth living. But you survived," Eliam said. "I did more than survive. I learned to see differently, to read with my fingers, tracing letters in my mind, to memorize vast portions of Scripture so I could recite them whenever needed, to observe the world through sound and scent and touch and taste, to perceive truths that my physical eyes had been too distracted to notice." Simon reached out and took Eliam's hand, running his fingers over the calluses and scars. "Builder's hands," he said, "strong and skilled, but I feel grief in them too. They want to build, but are afraid to begin. They remember how to shape stone, but have forgotten how to reach toward another person." The observation was so accurate that Eliam felt tears spring to his eyes. "I do not know how to start again," he admitted. "I do not know how to let anyone close after losing everyone I loved." "Then let me tell you what I have learned," Simon said. "Love always involves risk, always. There is no way to love without the possibility of loss. That is the price of connection, and it is worth paying. Not because we are guaranteed happiness, but because the alternative, a life sealed off from love to avoid pain, is not truly life at all. It is merely existence. But how do you bear it? How do you open your heart, knowing it might break again? You remember that broken hearts can still beat. That healing does not mean the absence of scars. but the ability to function despite them. You trust that the one who heals the brokenhearted knows what he is doing, even when we do not understand his methods or his timing. Simon fell silent for a moment, then began to recite in his strong, clear voice, "Praise the Lord! How good it is to sing praises to our God! How pleasant and fitting to praise him! The Lord builds up Jerusalem. He gathers the exiles of Israel. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit." Eliam recognized Psalm 147, the same verses his uncle had spoken, the same ones Azariah had quoted. Hearing them now, in this garden, from this man who had lost so much and found so much more, they resonated in a new way. "Do you know what I love most about that psalm?" Simon asked. "It moves from the intimate to the cosmic and back again without pause. God heals individual broken hearts, and he also numbers all the stars in the universe. He cares for the smallest sparrow, and he commands the snow and ice. Nothing is too small for his attention, and nothing is too large for his power. We matter to him, each of us, individually, even as he sustains the entire created order." "I want to believe that," Eliam said, "but my faith feels so small, so weak." "Faith is not measured by its size, but by its direction," Simon said. "A tiny seed of faith turned toward God will grow. A mountain of confidence placed in the wrong thing will crumble. Do not worry about the strength of your faith. Simply keep turning toward the light, like these herbs turning toward the sun. Growth will follow." They sat together for a long time, and Simon told Eliam stories from his years of learning to live without sight, how he had learned to identify each person in the village by their footstep, how he could tell the time of day by the warmth of the sun and the patterns of bird calls, how he had memorized the entire book of Psalms and found that they spoke more clearly to him now than when he had simply read them with his eyes. "The Psalms are full of broken people crying out to God," Simon said. "David, the great king, constantly pouring out his fears and doubts and griefs. Asaph questioning God's goodness. The sons of Korah wrestling with feeling abandoned. These were not people with perfect faith. They were people who brought their imperfect, struggling, messy faith to God and found that he met them there." "That gives me hope," Eliam admitted. "Good. Hope is the beginning of healing, not false hope that denies reality, but true hope that recognizes pain and believes in the possibility of something beyond it." When Eliam finally rose to leave, Simon stood as well and embraced him. "Go with God, my friend. Return to Jerusalem. Continue your work of building, but remember to build more than walls. Build relationships, build community, build a life that honors both your grief and your hope. Let your broken places become places of compassion. Let your scars be marks of survival, not symbols of defeat." "Thank you," Eliam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for being willing to be seen," Simon replied. "That takes more courage than most people realize." Section C, the synagogue and the scriptures. Eliam left the village as the sun was climbing toward midday, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. The conversations with Zechariah, and especially with Simon, had stirred something deep within him. Not immediate healing, but the sense that healing was possible, that the journey he was on was leading somewhere worth going. The road to Jerusalem would take him the rest of the day and into the evening. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, he realized he was approaching another small town just as preparations for Shabbat were beginning. Women were lighting candles in their homes, and men were making their way toward the local synagogue. On impulse, Eliam decided to stop for Shabbat. It had been months since he had properly observed the day of rest, years since he had done so in community, but something drew him now, a desire to reconnect not just with God, but with the rhythms and rituals that had once structured his life. He approached the synagogue, a modest building of stone and timber, and was greeted at the door by the attendant. "Shabbat shalom, brother. You are a traveler?" "Yes, I am on my way to Jerusalem from Bethlehem. May I join you for the service?" "Of course. All are welcome in God's house. Come." The interior of the synagogue was simple but beautiful. Oil lamps cast warm light on whitewashed walls. Wooden benches faced a raised platform where the Torah scroll was kept in an ornate ark. Men were gathering, some greeting friends, others finding quiet corners for private prayer. The air smelled of olive oil and old wood, incense, and human presence. Eliam found a place near the back and wrapped himself in his prayer shawl, the talent his father had given him when he came of age. He had not worn it in months, and touching the familiar fabric brought a flood of memories. His father teaching him how to wear it properly, explaining the significance of the tassels, the 613 fringes representing the 613 commandments. The service began with the evening prayers, the familiar words washing over Eliam like a gentle tide. He found himself actually meaning them this time, actually engaging with the ancient liturgy rather than simply reciting by rote. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings on the evening twilight, who opens gates with wisdom, who changes times and alters seasons, who arranges the stars in their heavenly courses as he wills." Stars again. Everywhere he turned, it seemed, he was being reminded of the stars, of God's intimate knowledge of each distant light, and by extension, his intimate knowledge of each human heart. After the evening prayers, the Torah scroll was brought out with great ceremony. It was Eliam's favorite part of Shabbat service, the reading of the ancient words, the connection with thousands of years of tradition, the sense of being part of something larger than himself. The portion that night was from the book of Deuteronomy, Moses' final words to the Israelites before they entered the promised land. The reader chanted in Hebrew, his voice carrying the distinctive melody that had been passed down through generations. Eliam closed his eyes and let the words sink into him. "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. Life and death, prosperity and adversity, the choices set before every human being." Eliam had felt for 3 years as though he had no choices, as though grief had chosen for him, had dictated every aspect of his existence. But perhaps he had more agency than he had believed. Perhaps every day presented him with the choice between life and death, not physical death, but the death of the spirit that comes from refusing to engage with the world. After the reading, the rabbi rose to offer commentary. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a thoughtful manner, and he spoke not from notes, but from the heart. "My friends," he began, "Moses places before the people a choice that seems simple. Choose life. Who would choose death? Who would not want blessing over curse? And yet, how often do we in our daily lives make choices that lead toward death rather than life? Not dramatic choices. We do not actively seek destruction, but subtle choices. The choice to nurse a grudge rather than forgive. The choice to isolate ourselves rather than seek community. The choice to hold on to bitterness rather than accept healing. Eliam felt as though the rabbi was speaking directly to him, though of course the man had no idea who Eliam was or what he was carrying. The Torah tells us to choose life, the rabbi continued. But what does that mean practically? I believe it means choosing each day to remain open to joy even in the midst of sorrow, to remain open to connection even after experiencing loss, to remain open to hope even when circumstances seem hopeless. This is not easy. In fact, it may be the hardest thing any of us will ever do, but it is the path to life, to blessing, to the fullness of existence that God intends for us. After the service, the congregation shared a simple communal meal: bread and wine, fish and vegetables, the fruits of the season. Eliam found himself seated next to a young father with two small children, a boy and a girl who reminded him painfully of Abigail. But instead of retreating into his grief, Eliam engaged with them, answering the boy's questions about his travels, listening to the girl's excited description of a bird she had seen that day. The father noticed Eliam's attention to his children and smiled. They are a handful, but they are our joy. Do you have children? The question, which would have devastated Eliam just weeks ago, now brought only a gentle sadness. I had a daughter once. She died when she was about your daughter's age. I am so sorry, the father said, his face full of genuine compassion. That is every parent's nightmare. It was the hardest thing I have ever endured, but I am learning that perhaps she would want me to honor her memory by living fully, not by dying slowly with grief. That is wisdom, the father said quietly, and great courage. After the meal, as people began to disperse to their homes for the night, the rabbi approached Eliam. I saw you during the service. You seemed deeply moved by the reading. I was, Eliam admitted. Your words about choosing life, they spoke to something I am wrestling with. Would you walk with me? The rabbi asked. I find I think more clearly when I am moving. They left the synagogue and walked through the quiet streets of the town. Shabbat had descended fully now, and the peace of the day of rest lay over everything like a blessing. No work was being done, no commerce conducted. People sat on their doorsteps or in their courtyards, talking quietly, enjoying the enforced rest. Tell me about your wrestling, the rabbi invited. And once again, Eliam found himself sharing his story. But each telling was different, he realized. Each time he spoke of his loss and his grief, he was also speaking of his journey back toward life. The story was changing as he changed, or perhaps he was simply able to see it differently. The rabbi listened carefully, then said, You remind me of Jacob, wrestling with the angel at the ford of Jabbok. All night he struggled, refusing to let go until he received a blessing. And when morning came, he was both wounded and blessed. His hip was dislocated, but he had seen God face to face and survived. He walked away limping, but he walked away transformed. I feel that I have been wrestling, Eliam said, with God, with grief, with myself. But I do not know if I am winning or losing. Perhaps that is the wrong question, the rabbi suggested. Perhaps the point of the wrestling is not to win, but to engage, to refuse to simply accept defeat, to keep struggling toward understanding even when understanding seems impossible. Jacob's wound became part of his identity. He was renamed Israel, he who struggles with God. Your wounds, too, are becoming part of who you are. Not the only part, but an integral part. And that is not something to be ashamed of. They walked in silence for a while, and then the rabbi said, There is a teaching I want to share with you. It comes from Psalm 147, which we will read tomorrow during morning prayers. Would you like to hear it? Yes, Eliam said, smiling slightly at how this psalm kept appearing in his life. I would. The psalm tells us that God heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. But then, immediately after, it says he determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Do you know why these two ideas are placed side by side? I have wondered about that, Eliam admitted. I believe it is to show us that God's attention is infinite. Caring for broken hearts does not distract him from running the universe. Numbering the stars does not prevent him from noticing our tears. He is not limited, as we are, to caring about either the big things or the small things. He cares about all of it all at once, with perfect attention. You matter to him as much as the stars matter to him. Your healing is as important to the functioning of his creation as the movement of the heavens. That is, Eliam paused, searching for words. That is both comforting and overwhelming. Yes, the rabbi agreed. The truth about God is always both those things. If it does not comfort us, it is too small. If it does not overwhelm us, it is too tame. The God of Israel is not safe, but he is good. Not predictable, but faithful. Not always comprehensible, but always trustworthy. They returned to the synagogue, where the rabbi showed Eliam to a small room where travelers could sleep. It was simple, but clean, with a sleeping mat and a window that looked out on the town. Eliam thanked the rabbi for his kindness and his wisdom, then settled in for the night. But sleep did not come immediately. He lay on the mat, looking out at the stars visible through the window, thinking about everything he had heard and experienced over the past days. The journey from Bethlehem had been relatively short in distance, but immense in significance. He had encountered person after person who had, in their own way, pointed him back toward life, back toward hope, back toward faith. He thought about Nathan and Leah, the elderly couple who had shown him that love persists even in the face of death. About Hannah in Jerusalem, who had taught him about defending what should not be scattered. About his uncle Simeon, who had given him permission to live again. About the men in the village who had learned to work together despite their differences. About Simon, the blind man who saw more clearly than most people with sight. About the young woman on the road, pregnant and grateful. About the rabbi, who had helped him see his wounds not as marks of shame, but as signs of survival. Each encounter had been a thread, and together they were weaving something new in his understanding, a tapestry that included his grief but was not defined by it, that honored his past while opening toward his future. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness. He was not entirely sure to whom he was speaking. To God, to the people who had shown him kindness, to Miriam and Abigail, to his father and uncle, perhaps to all of them at once. Thank you for not letting me go. Thank you for pursuing me even when I was running away. Thank you for these people who have reminded me what it means to be human, to be part of a community, to be alive. And finally, as the stars wheeled slowly overhead in their ancient patterns, Eliam slept. And for the first time in 3 years, his dreams were not haunted by fever and loss, but filled with images of building, walls rising stone by stone, foundations being laid, structures emerging from chaos into order, beauty from brokenness. For Wave 3, the Valley of the Shadow section. A. Descent, literal and metaphoric. Eliam woke before dawn on Shabbat morning and attended the morning prayers at the synagogue. The psalm reading, as the rabbi had mentioned, was indeed from Psalm 147. Hearing it chanted in the traditional melody, surrounded by the community of worshipers, Eliam felt the words settle into his bones in a new way. They were not just ideas anymore, but live truths, principles he had seen demonstrated in the lives of the people he had met. After the morning service and a simple breakfast, Eliam took his leave of the rabbi and the congregation. The hospitality had been generous, and he felt fortified not just in body, but in spirit. As he walked through the town's narrow streets one last time, he noticed details he had missed the night before. The way morning light painted the limestone walls gold, the sound of children laughing as they played, the smell of bread baking for the day after Shabbat would end at sunset. The road to Jerusalem climbed steadily through rocky terrain. Eliam's body had grown strong from days of walking, his feet calloused and sure on the uneven path. He moved with a different rhythm now, not the heavy trudge of someone fleeing pain, but the steady pace of someone walking toward purpose. By midday, he reached a high ridge where the land opened before him in all directions. And there, rising from the hills like a crown of gold and white stone, was Jerusalem, the city of his fathers, the city of David, the city where the temple stood as testament to God's presence among his people. Eliam stood transfixed, his heart swelling with an emotion he could not quite name. Gratitude, perhaps, or homecoming, or simply recognition that this place, this moment, was exactly where he needed to be. He thought of all the miles he had traveled, all the people he had met, all the lessons learned. Each encounter had been a stone, carefully placed, building something new in the architecture of his soul. Nathan and Leah teaching him about enduring love, the village men showing him the power of unity, Simon revealing that blindness could bring sight, the young pregnant woman reminding him that joy and sorrow could coexist, his uncle Simeon blessing him with permission to live again. And through it all, woven like a golden thread, the words of Psalm 147, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. He determines the number of the stars and calls them each by name. Eliam descended toward Jerusalem as the afternoon sun began its westward journey. He entered through the same southern gate he had left through days ago, but everything felt different now. The streets that had seemed merely familiar were now precious. The faces of strangers held stories he wanted to know. The very stones beneath his feet seemed to pulse with sacred purpose. He made his way to the construction site, arriving just as the workers were finishing for the day. Joash saw him first and broke into a broad smile. "Eliam, you have returned. We were beginning to wonder." "I had farther to travel than I expected," Eliam said, "but I am back now." "And you are different," Joash observed, studying him carefully. "Your eyes are clearer. Your shoulders sit easier. Whatever you found in Bethlehem, it was more than you went seeking. I found my uncle dying, yes, but I also found myself beginning to live again." Benjamin and David gathered around, and Eliam shared some of his journey with them. Not all of it. Some experiences were too sacred for immediate sharing, needed time to settle and integrate, but enough to let them know that the man who had left was not quite the same man who had returned. "The wall?" Eliam asked, gesturing to their work. "How does it progress?" "Come see," Joash said, leading him to the structure. It had grown significantly in his absence, rising now to shoulder height, solid and true. "We replaced that cracked stone you identified. The structure is sound." Eliam ran his hand along the wall, feeling the fit of stone against stone, the smooth mortar between, the strength of what they had built together. "Yes," he said softly, "it will stand." "As will you," Joash said quietly. "Welcome home, my friend." That evening, As the sun set over Jerusalem, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple, Eliam stood on the roof of his small house and watched the stars begin to appear. One by one they emerged, first the brightest, then gradually the smaller ones, until the sky was scattered with countless points of light. He thought of his father's words, of how God knew each star by name. He thought of Miriam and Abigail, wondered if they could see him now, hoped they would be proud of the man he was becoming. He thought of the long journey ahead, not a physical journey now, but the daily work of living with intention, building with purpose, loving without fear. Tomorrow he would return to the construction site. He would place stone upon stone, teaching David, working alongside Benjamin, following Joash's guidance. He would do the work his hands were made for, but he would do it with a heart that was learning to be whole again. And in the evenings, he thought, perhaps he would visit the synagogue more regularly. Perhaps he would open his home to others who were struggling, share the wisdom that had been shared with him. Perhaps he would even in time open his heart to the possibility of love again, not to replace what he had lost, but to honor it by continuing to live fully. The night deepened around him, and Eliam wrapped himself in his prayer shawl. He spoke the evening prayers, each word now weighted with meaning earned through experience. And when he came to the Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," his voice rang clear and strong. He was broken still in some ways. The cracks remained. The scars were real. But he was learning what Simon had taught him, that wholeness was not the absence of wounds, but the presence of something strong enough to hold the pieces together. And what held him together was faith, not perfect faith, not faith without questions, but faith that chose to trust even when understanding was incomplete. "Thank you," he whispered to the stars, to the night, to the God who numbered both stars and tears. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for the journey. Thank you for bringing me home, not just to this place, but to myself." And there, on that rooftop in Jerusalem, under the same stars that had shone on Abraham and Moses and David, Eliam felt something he had not felt in 3 long years. He felt alive, truly, fully, gratefully alive. The city settled into its evening rhythms around him. Somewhere, a mother sang her child to sleep. Somewhere, a couple laughed together. Somewhere, an old man said his final prayers. Life continued in its beautiful, painful, sacred ordinariness. And Eliam was part of it again, no longer a ghost haunting his own existence, but a living man among living people, building a life stone by stone, day by day, breath by breath. He looked once more at the stars, scattered across the darkness like promises written in light, each one known, each one named, each one held in its course by the same hand that was healing his broken heart, binding up his wounds, teaching him to live again. "He determines the number of the stars," Eliam recited softly, "and calls them each by name. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit." Peace settled over him like a blessing, deep and true. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows. But for now, in this moment, all was well. The Lord had built up Jerusalem. He had gathered the scattered exiles. He had healed the broken-hearted. And Eliam, the broken builder, was learning to be whole again. As sleep began to claim him, he whispered one final prayer. "Blessed are you, Lord our God, who brings rest to the weary, who gathers what has been scattered, who makes all things new. May your peace rest upon all who wander in darkness. May your light guide them home. Amen." The stars wheeled slowly overhead in their ancient dance, each one exactly where it should be, each one known by name. And in a small house in Jerusalem, a man who had been lost began to dream of building again, not just walls of stone, but a life of purpose, a future of hope, a heart made whole through the patient, persistent love of the one who heals all wounds.